Welcome, Gunrunner.
In recent years, the company that very much created the video game industry we know and love, Atari, made an extremely unlikely comeback with a new console in the form of the Atari VCS, formerly known as the much less confusing Atari box. The console proved to be rather successful, smashing its crowdfunding targets, much to many people's surprise, and made it into major retail stores too. Atari to continue to support it with new games, including the absolutely superb Recharge series. Then, just a matter of weeks ago, Atari announced another new console, one that would use real cartridges, just as their original systems did. Known as the Atari 2600 Plus, it would play all existing 2600 and 7800 releases, as well as new games being launched by Atari to support it, including the much awaited Berserk Enhanced and Mr. Jump and Run, a remake of their popular PC game. But comebacks like this are extremely rare in such a cutthroat sector, and this got me thinking about all the other people who had tried and failed to bring back famous console brands from our youth. And that of course led me to write this video. So right here we have 5 examples of console monikers that were thought to be dead, only to make a comeback many years after. And in every case they failed to live up to our nostalgia and died a very sad second death. All 5 stories here are absolutely fascinating, so I really look forward to reading your comments at the end. Now let's get on with the show.
Tom likes collector card games, and Jim likes video games. To make a truly great game, I was thinking you could combine them. Eh? I meant combine the games, not the kids!
The new Hyperscan video game system is here, featuring X-Men. It's where collectible card games meet video games. Scan your character, battle and gain power, rescan to save the power permanently back to your card. Hyperscan video game system with 1 controller and X-Men game pack. Other games coming soon, sold separately, rated E10 plus to teen.
HyperscanGaming.com.
I don't think I need to tell any of you about the Mattel Intellivision. Released in 1979, it was the first genuine contender to the Atari 2600, not only being more powerful, but it also introduced a number of new innovations such as the disc controllers and a speech module. It was a hugely successful venture for Mattel and even managed to keep on going for a while after the Great North American video game crash, with the console being taken over by a new company formed by former Mattel Electronics employees called INTV Corp. And it's still fondly remembered by large swathes of the retro gaming community today. But what isn't fondly remembered is its horrendous successor, the Mattel Hyperscan, which is the subject of the very first entry in this list. Being released some 27 years after the Intellivision in October 2006, it's also a very unlikely successor, and one that baffled the press and consumers alike on its debut. Now predominantly a toy company, Mattel were looking on with envious eyes at the booming video game sector that was now being dominated by Sony and their PlayStation brand, with both Microsoft and Nintendo getting ready to release new systems of their own in the form of the Xbox 360 and Nintendo Wii respectively. Mattel thought they had seen a gap in the market for a low-priced console aimed at kids, especially kids who were familiar with Mattel's IP and liked collecting things. The gimmick of this console was the RFID scanner that would allow you to add extra content to its CD-based range of games. These titles were sold as $20 game packs, which consisted of a disc plus at least 6 game cards. Then, additional cards which contained such things as new characters, abilities and levels would be available via $10 booster packs. As with most trading cards of the time, each pack was randomised, making you buy multiple packs and swap cards with your friends. This meant that each game had potentially endless DLC possibilities. Quite ahead of its time, I'm sure you'll agree. Though this does sound quite cool, it was so badly implemented that the $70 console was being sold for less than half price within 6 months of release and was discontinued in less than a year. The scanner was far too finicky, making the playing of games very frustrating, especially when the console required you to constantly scan cards to progress. The controllers were also criticised for being very unresponsive, and the loading times were chronic. Just 5 games ended up being released for the Hyperscan, all based on licensed properties, and the console is now widely regarded as being one of the biggest failures of all time. One period in Japanese gaming history that seems to get completely ignored is the pre-Famicom era. It's almost like there was no video game industry in Japan until Nintendo came along. But that couldn't be further from the truth, as prior to the Famicom arriving there were some really interesting systems on the market in the land of the rising sun. Of those, there is no doubt that the Epoch CassetteVision and its successor, the Super CassetteVision, were the most important. In fact, at one point, Epoch held just over 70% of the console market in Japan. Though they started off producing various Pong clones as early as 1975, it was the original CassetteVision that was Epoch's big breakthrough. Released in July 1981, the cassette part of the name didn't refer to tapes, rather ROM cartridges, as in the early days of gaming the two terms were almost interchangeable, mostly due to early cartridges looking just like 8-track tapes. This simple console had just 12 games, controls that were built into the console itself, and it connected to a standard TV set. The CassetteVision didn't actually have any chips inside it at all. These were all contained within the cartridges themselves, with the main unit just offering a way to play them. This was actually quite common in many early Japanese consoles. Epoch sold just over 400,000 consoles in the 3 years it was on sale, being deemed a huge success. Due to the limitations of the CassetteVision and the huge expense of putting all the hardware into the carts, Epoch decided to go back to the drawing board and create a new Super version. Unfortunately, by the time the much delayed Super CassetteVision was ready to hit the market, both the Nintendo Famicom and Sega SG-1000 had arrived. It still managed to have some limited success however, despite sitting in third place sales-wise, and a total of 30 games were released for the console before it was discontinued in 1987, including big name titles like Boulder Dash, Miner 2049er, Mappy, Doraemon, and Pole Position 2. Just after the release of the Super CassetteVision in 1984, Epoch also launched a handheld called the Game Pocket, which was based on the same hardware found in those early CassetteVision cartridges, with a simple sound, 2K of RAM and small black and white LCD screen. However, this proved a lot less successful and was discontinued within a year, with only 7 games ever being produced for it. And this leads us onto the main part of this entry quite nicely, because despite the failure of this portable, Epoch decided to return to the console market some 4 years after the Super CassetteVision was discontinued with another very simple and lackluster handheld, the infamous Barcode Battler. In many ways this is also related to another console on this list that I've already covered, the Hyperscan, because the main gimmick of the Barcode Battler was also the ability to collect and scan cards to improve the gameplay experience. But unlike Mattel's console, Epoch's had just one game that was already built into the console, with no way to change that. Basically, the Barcode Battler was just an enhanced version of Epoch's existing range of LCD games. The built-in game was an RPG of sorts, where you scan some barcodes to equip characters, and then either fought against CPU-controlled enemies in the quest mode, or against a second player. As well as the included cards, Epoch also sold card packs, although these were only ever released in Japan, and you could also scan in the barcodes from random products you could find around your house. This became the main selling point of the console when it was advertised in the West. The Barcode Battler was actually fairly successful in Japan, prompting Epoch to release a Barcode Battler 2, that had the ability to interface with the Nintendo Famicom and Super Famicom via a special adapter, to be used with a range of compatible games. This version of the handheld was then chosen for release in the West, as Epoch teamed up with fellow toy company Tomy, who already had a huge distribution network across the region. Despite a massive advertising campaign across both Europe and North America, the Western Barcode Battler was a dismal failure, looking like a bad joke when put next to the popular handhelds of the time like the Nintendo Game Boy and Atari Lynx. It didn't help that Epoch and Tomy completely ignored the Nintendo interfacing in the West and never released any of the additional card packs in the region either, which also included Nintendo related content. What started as a very successful venture in Japan ended up in a colossal failure in the West that cost the company millions of dollars. Okay, so the next one is a little bit contentious because, as many people will know, Magnavox were a wholly owned subsidiary of Philips Electronics, and I'm sure most people are well aware of the Dutch company's rich history in the video games industry, that saw them turning out various computers and consoles with mixed success from the late 70s right through the 80s and into the late 90s. But a lot of Americans don't seem to be aware of the connection between Magnavox and Philips, and there is a fairly understandable reason for that. Now, I'm sure that everyone watching this is more than aware of the Magnavox Odyssey, the world's very first home console. Developed by the godfather of gaming himself, the one and only Ralph Baer, it would be unleashed on an unsuspecting audience in 1972, and it would change the world forever with it. The console featured a strange paddle-like controller and could play a series of interchangeable games, which was nothing short of revolutionary at the time. The Magnavox Odyssey sold moderately well, with sales exceeding 350,000 units, proving that there was a market for such devices, and this was one of the many things, along with Magnavox's dominance of the North American TV and radio market, that prompted Philips to purchase the company in 1975. Because the brand was so strong in that part of the world, Philips continued to use the Magnavox name on most of the products sold in that region. This included the successor to the Magnavox Odyssey, the Odyssey 2, which was known as the Philips Video Pack in Europe and Philips Odyssey in South America. Released in 1978 to compete with the Atari 2600, the O2 was even more successful than the original console, selling over 2 million units worldwide and being revised several times, including the more powerful Philips Video Pack G7400, which is due to be released in North America as the Magnavox Odyssey 3. However, the infamous North American video game crash put paid to those plans, and the Magnavox name disappeared completely from the video game industry forever. Well, until 1990 that is, when Philips chose to resurrect the brand to market their new CDI console in the US and Canada. The reason for this was pretty simple. The Magnavox name was still closely associated with all the things your average North American citizen would find in the corner of their living room: TVs, radios, stereos, video players, and even laserdisc players. And as Philips were marketing the CDI as a multimedia machine that would replace several of those, it made perfect sense to use the Magnavox branding. They even kept the name when they relaunched the CDI as a games console in its 450 guise a few years later, as they tried to desperately compete with the likes of the 3DO, Amiga CD32 and Atari Jaguar. However, while the CDI was moderately successful in Europe, particularly in the Netherlands and France, it was a pretty dismal failure in North America, where people deemed it too expensive to replace their cheap video players and not powerful enough or well supported enough to replace their Sega and Nintendo consoles. Philips ceased support for the Magnavox version of the CDI in 1995, whilst in Europe it was still supported for another 4 years, and now the name has been licensed out to budget electronics manufacturer Funai for use on cheap audio-visual equipment. What a shame. Now, this one probably seems a bit strange to anyone who isn't Korean, because in the West everyone knows Samsung as a hugely successful electronics company, best known for their 4K UHD TVs and Android mobile phones. But in their homeland they actually have a very rich and interesting history in the video game sector. This history starts in the latter part of 1983 when they became the first Korean company to sign up to the MSX standard, releasing the SPC 800 computer the year after. They would then go on to release a second division of this MSX1 hardware, as well as a host of software and accessories to use with it, including joysticks, monitors and printers. Then in 1987 they signed an exclusive contract with Sega to become the official manufacturer and distributor of the Master System in Korea, where it would be renamed the Samsung Game Boy. Now you might be interested to hear how such a deal came about, so I'll explain a little bit more. You see, back in the mid-80s there were still significant tensions present between Japan and South Korea, dating back to the Second World War, where the Japanese had occupied the country. This meant that there was a complete ban on importing Japanese products, so manufacturers like Samsung found a way around this by licensing Japanese designs and manufacturing them in their homeland. This venture proved so successful for the company, in fact, that they later went on to produce their own versions of the Mega Drive as both the Super Game Boy and Super Aladdin Boy, the Game Gear as the Handy Game Boy, the Mega CD as the CD Aladdin Boy, 32X just adding Super as a prefix, and finally the Saturn with no name change. They also produced the SVP chip used in the Mega Drive version of Virtua Racing 2, as well as numerous games under their own branding. I should also mention that Samsung produced their own version of the 3DO2, though this was a much less successful venture. Once import rules started to be relaxed in the late 90s, they pulled out of the console market completely. However, as we entered a new decade, Samsung were lured back into the sector once more, as a new universal format emerged that was not unlike the MSX and 3DO in many ways, being solely licensed out to third-party manufacturers. This new standard was known as Nuon, and was the brainchild of a company called VM Labs, who had been formed by a group of ex-Atari and Flare Technology employees who had previously been responsible for both the Atari Jaguar and the unreleased Jaguar 2. They also hired many ex-Jaguar developers to work on software for the new format too, including the likes of Jeff Minter, who created Tempest 3000, Miracle Designs, who created an unofficial sequel to Atari carts called Miracle Racing, and Eclipse with Iron Soldier 3. The selling point of Nuon was that it was integrated DVD technology, so rather than being positioned as a standalone games console, it was sold as something that could be added to a DVD player to make it capable of playing state-of-the-art games, as well as movies and TV shows. The idea was certainly very sound, and Samsung weren't the only people to sign up, as the likes of RCA, also making a console comeback after the failure of the Studio 2 in the late 70s, and Toshiba jumped on board with their own Nuon players. So what went wrong then? Well, that's pretty simple actually. The PlayStation 2 arrived, just a few months before the much delayed Nuon made its debut, effectively killing it off before it even got going. The PS2 was of course the exact reverse of the Nuon, a games console that also played DVDs. It was also much cheaper, much better supported, and marketed a lot better too. The Nuon format was gone from the market within 3 years, with just 8 games being released for it. There was no way I couldn't save this one until last, not only because it's the only entry in this list that represents a comeback in the modern console era, but also because the story is just so ridiculous and unbelievable, but I still struggle to comprehend its truth, as do many others. But yes, the following train wreck really did happen. This story actually starts back in 2015 when a man called Mike Kennedy, who was also the brains behind the Game Gavel auction website and Retro magazine, announced his intentions to create a new console with a retro design that would use cartridges and be able to play games from all previous generations of gaming, not unlike the recently released Evercade Versus actually. He christened this console the Retro VGS, with the latter part standing for Video Game System, as you may have guessed. And he also announced it would use FPGA technology, making it easy to add different cores to support different systems, and he would raise the funding to create it via Kickstarter. However, almost as soon as the Kickstarter was launched, the warning lights started to activate. After initially promising a very attractive $150 price point, the price was raised to a staggering $350. Then the Retro VGS team failed to provide a pre-production prototype in time, a condition of the Kickstarter, putting the project in jeopardy. This caused the campaign to be pulled, and within weeks it was back live again, but this time on Indiegogo, who didn't require any prototypes to be shown. Now, if you already thought the asking price of the Retro VGS was ridiculous, wait until you hear how much they were asking for in funding, an eye-watering $1.95 million. Wow. With all the red lights already flashing, things started to totally implode, but not before the Retro VGS team were able to secure 2 pretty big wins. Firstly, they purchased all the moulds and tooling for the Atari Jaguar, and announced that the new console would use the same case and cartridge design. They also signed an agreement with Coleco Holdings to use the famous name on the new console, making it a successor to the popular Coleco Telstar and ColecoVision, some comeback for the truly historic brand. But then things started to go wrong, really wrong, and this all started with the debut of the Coleco Chameleon at the American International Toy Fair in New York in February 2016. The display unit at the show soon attracted big crowds, who quickly smelled something rather fishy. It seemed that this so-called prototype was nothing more than a Super Nintendo crammed inside an Atari Jaguar case. People quickly pointed out the use of a SNES controller and the amount of electrical tape present as evidence of this. The retro team then posted a series of new images to their Facebook page to try and disprove this theory, now using a clear case to emphasise their point. However, the transparent appearance simply allowed people to analyse what was inside quite easily, and this prototype was quickly branded as a fake, with the motherboard actually being nothing more than a CCTV capture card. The retro community erupted over these allegations, with Coleco Holdings releasing a statement on March 2, 2016 via their Facebook page addressing the controversy. Coleco Holdings demanded that the prototype units be inspected by independent engineers and stated they would pull their name and all support for the project if the allegations turned out to be true. Just 6 days later, Coleco pulled their branding from the project, wishing the retro team luck in the process. On the exact same day, the Retro VGS webpage and social media presence were shut down, and the project was effectively dead, having only ever raised $81,158 of that $1.95 million goal. Mike Kennedy disappeared from the scene completely, selling Retro Magazine and the Game Gabble website. He remains an enigma within the retro scene, forever associated with the legend that is the Coleco Chameleon.
They are all around us. Millions of barcode warriors and wizards waiting to fight. Waiting for Barcode Battler to free their awesome power. Free the power! But be warned, nobody knows what's really out there. The battle has just begun. Barcode Battler. Free the power!
And that rounds up my look at 5 failed comebacks from classic console companies. Can you think of any other examples of famous video game companies that made a comeback with new hardware only to fall at the last hurdle? Or did you own one of these systems and want to share your own story about it? We'd also love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons to continue to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Grady Haynes, Mitchell Valentino, Seth A. Robinson, Carl Olsen, Dos Gamerman, Sonic Mania 999, Paul Daniel, Andrew McKay, Retro Resolution, Matt Standish, James Taylor, Drogdor the Burninator, Mins, A Bit Guy, Luke MC, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Alan J. Dodds, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to host extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.